Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sylvia Sadowski, and I'd like to welcome you to our PED Lunch and Learn, the first one of the year. Today, we'll be talking about community improvement plans, their importance to economic development, municipalities, and communities. Our presenters today are from the Economic Development Division, and I'd like to welcome Phil Caldwell. He's the Senior Project Manager in Urban Renewal. Carlo Gorni, he's a coordinator in Urban Municipal Incentives. Johnpaul Loiacono, he's a senior planner in economic development. And Judy, the manager of commercial districts and small business and the small business team. So before we get started, I'd like to ensure that everyone's microphones are muted. And so everybody knows this Lunch and Learn is being recorded and will be shared inside the March 1st PED Stuff and newsletter in case you need to refer to it, or for people who couldn't make it today. And at the end, at about 12:45, we'll have a question and answer session where everybody is invited to raise their hand and unmute themselves and ask their question to our speakers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Judy Lamb to get us started.
Thank you, Sylvia. And we can proceed. So again, we're available anytime, and I know Carlo, who's on this presentation, will kill me, but we'd all like to wish him a happy birthday today. So now everyone knows his birthday. Anyway, we thought we'd start off the slide because probably some of you might not know, what does economic development do? And so the idea is we lay the groundwork of attracting businesses, investments to Hamilton, and we answer that question, why Hamilton? Why should we come here? So we have divisions, which is my section is commercial districts and small business. We have the business investment sector development section, municipal land development, and our real estate portfolio is also managed all under ECDEV and real estate. So the type of things that we would do is we're the liaison to our businesses. We do the attraction, we do lead generation, we offer all the financial incentives through ECDEV, through I'll abbreviate the CDSP team, which is my team. And, we focus on workforce planning and development, HIPCs within BISD. So, and the Hamilton Business Center, which offers all assistance to small business, starting a business, how to expand. We've heard of programs like Digital Main Street. That's all under our HBC team as well. Next. So the CIPs, which is short for Community Improvement Plan, is how we focus the attention of the priorities locally and our municipal initiatives. So it helps us target certain areas that we think are in transition or are in need of repair, rehabilitation, or redevelopment opportunities. They'll facilitate and encourage the community change and support for community and council priorities in a coordinated manner. And we use it to stimulate private sector investment and change through the municipal incentive programs that's not otherwise permitted for municipalities to provide under the Municipal Act, as that would be considered bonusing and is illegal. So where we, this quote is really, I guess, explains what we do. We repair, rejuvenate existing places to the highest form of sprawl containment. And I know we're all interested to make sure that we don't just promote urban sprawl. So this is a good way of doing it through our CIPs. And in terms of when we're looking at developing a CIP, the idea is looking at the strategic direction and priorities for Hamilton. So one of them, obviously, is the downtown revitalization. Our CIPs are offered in our downtown SEPA area, our community downtowns, our BIAs, and commercial corridors. And then we have, it was declared a climate change emergency by our council. So environmental sustainable development is important. So you'll see later that we have taken that into consideration. Taking advantage of brownfields and making sure it's put to higher use and cleaning up properties, soils is important. Housing is our latest in terms of, you've probably heard of a lot of the programs through HAF, but housing CIP is also important. Our business improvement areas and commercial corridors, the BIAs do a lot of working behind the scenes, working with the businesses, and we support those BIAs and the commercial corridors. And overall, really, economic growth is what we want to see in Hamilton, the whole city of Hamilton in general. And I'm going to leave it to Phil to explain the actual legislation and the processes and the plans that we have.
Good afternoon, everyone. My attempt was to create as boring a title slide as possible. Legislation processes and plans. So as far as the legislation goes, CIPs are a tool that is made available. And as Judy referenced, it allows municipalities in Ontario to take actions or provide financial incentives that would otherwise be considered bonusing and prohibited under the Municipal Act. But it's largely left up to each council to determine what they believe it means to improve a community. So it's very much broad, very left to the council to decide. And as part of establishing a CIP, one of the most important criteria is also that you establish a geographic boundary within which those programs and initiatives will be offered. That area is called a community improvement project area, or CIPA. So you might be familiar or heard the term downtown CIPA. That's because we have a CIPA in our downtown for various incentives and programs that we operate there. One thing that's important to note also is that CIPs are entirely voluntary. There is no stipulation or legislative requirement that a city or municipality provide incentives. It is purely of council's free will and want to address a particular impediment to development within the community that a CIP can overcome by providing financial incentives. CIPs are a policy tool. They are in many ways actually aligned with provincial legislation respecting official plans. It is seen as an arm of an official plan to a certain degree. And so in that perspective, there are various pieces of legislation that apply to CIPs when creating them or amending them. So we do have requirements for statutory public notices in the newspaper when we're creating one or taking one to council. We do also require a statutory public meeting that we take to planning committee for CIPs. And another point that's maybe not also known by most people is that CIPs can be appealed, just like any other decision through planning, for example, to the Ontario Land Tribunal. It's rare, but it does happen. So just wanted to provide a bit of an overview of what a CIP can. So what a CIP can do is establish our incentive programs that are intended to support community improvement. They can provide grants or loans for permanent, and I emphasize, building improvements, construction costs, or studies supporting development. And added benefit of community improvement plans is also that it gives the municipality certain additional rights to fulfill its community improvement objective. Specifically, it allows the municipality to acquire, hold, clear, grade, or otherwise prepare lands for improvement. It allows the city to construct, repair, rehabilitate, or improve buildings on land that the city's acquired. Or it also allows the city to enter into public-private partnerships, again, in the context of allowing the city to do things that would otherwise have been considered bonusing to a private enterprise. What it cannot do is provide grants or loans for temporary improvements. So a good analogy is if you can pick it up and take it out the door to another location, it's probably something that a CIP is not intended to support. It is not to be used for any improvements or constructions that the city itself has deemed to not be in line with our own objectives. So we have certain clauses around council's ability to deny grants, for example, if there was a decision at the OLT on an application that council was not supportive of, that's a criteria that, for example, we would not maybe want to provide a grant for that. We can't provide grants or loans for lease, rent, any of those kind of intangible costs. And we also can't provide grants or loans for staff wages. We also can't provide any programs that are beyond the established community improvement project area that has been created to administer the programs. In many cases, our SEPAs are the entire boundary of the city of Hamilton. In other cases, we have more targeted and delineated boundaries that are for specific purposes, like downtown, for example, or in our BIAs, or in certain commercial districts across the city. And a CIP cannot cancel property taxes. We do provide tax increment grants through our CIPs, but that requires the property owner to pay the taxes, and then we give a grant rebating a portion of that. So this is just a bit of an overview of what a typical review process looks like. So in our team, we're responsible for administering most of the CIPs and also undertaking 5-year reviews. So a review of our CIPs every 5 years. The intent is to make sure that the programs are meeting their intended objectives and that we're scanning other jurisdictions to see where we fit in terms of the programs and incentives we're providing versus, say, another municipality who might be trying to attract the same kind of development or achieve the same kind of objectives. And also to make sure that when we review, we're keeping aligned with council's priorities, which may change with every term or it could evolve over time. We need to make sure the programs are consistently addressing council's priorities as we proceed with the programs. So just as a very high level overview, the first 3 things we do when we start a review is we engage certain internal and external stakeholder engage in consultation with internal and external stakeholders. We will scan and review the community and council priorities that have been established so far. And we will also conduct a municipal best practices of jurisdiction scan of usually other Southern Ontario municipalities of a similar size and development history. Out of that, we establish a scope and focus for the CIP review at the outset. We then take that to a public engagement workshop to put the feelers out about what we're thinking, see if that's resonating with the needs and wants of the community. And based on the feedback we receive, we refine, and we start drafting some ideas around what an amended CIP and the programs look like. Our first step, I mentioned before that we have to go to planning committee, but before that, we do go to general issues committee as an initial step to present our proposed changes to a CIP in terms of new programs or other changes to program terms. And that's where we get a full sense from council about whether there's support for what we're proposing or if they wish for us to be directed to explore other things that we may not have considered. Once we've reached that point and we get the feedback, we then make the changes if there were any directed to us and prepare the formal bylaws. Those bylaws are then brought back to planning committee for a statutory public meeting. And then once passed and adopted, a 20-day appeal period kicks in. And then once that appeal period is over, the programs and CIPs come into effect. And these are the primary CIPs that we have in the city. I believe there's one additional one I didn't put on here. These are the 4 we're most intimately knowledgeable of. We have a CIP environmental sustainability, which was created in 2010 that is mainly focused on LEED certifications, providing tax grants to incentivize LEED certifications and development. We have a Revitalizing Hamilton's Commercial District CIP. That one is focused mainly on our downtown downtown revitalization, the revitalization of BIAs and other commercial corridors throughout the city, predominantly in the lower city and in our former municipal community downtowns like Waterdown and Stony Creek, but includes some other areas as well. And then we have the environmental remediation and site enhancement CIP, which is also goes by ERACE. That is our programs that support investigation, remediation, and redevelopment of environmentally contaminated properties in the city. And then lastly, in our most recent CIP is the Housing for Hamilton CIP. This was initially created back in 2019 to facilitate some programs around the Roxborough demonstration project for mixed income, mixed tenure project out in Roxborough. It has most recently been updated just in the last, this month actually, through planning committee to enable new programs being supported by the CMHC's Housing Accelerator Fund program. So we're just about to enter into an appeal period on that CIP. And the numbers down at the bottom, the years down at the bottom are just an idea of when those plans were first created and when they were last updated. So for example, the Revitalizing Hamilton's Commercial District CIP was first created in a very different form, but kind of its lineage goes back to 1997 as far as the efforts of the city to support revitalization in the downtown. And our most recent update was in 2021. And now I will hand it off to the birthday boy, Carlo, to talk about the implementation and our existing programs.
Thank you very much, Phil. So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Carlo Gorni. I'm the coordinator of urban renewal incentives here within Commercial District and Small Business of ECDEV. So within our section, we administer 12 financial incentive grant and loan programs, 5 ERACE, or environmental remediation and site enhancement programs, and the LEAD program, which Johnpaul is going to speak to a little later. Now, when it comes to our non-ERACE, non-LEAD programs, for the most part, these are programs to assist with the costs of renovating or redeveloping properties within various CIPs in the city. Some of them are area specific in that they only may be available in some CIPs and not others. One of them, our Commercial District Revitalization Grant Program, while available in all CIPs, provides for the possibility of higher maximum grants and further funding for public art, including murals in business improvement areas. And if you want to jot this down, if it's not on the last slide, information on all of our programs can be found at the investinhamilton.ca website. So instead of going through all of the programs individually, what we thought we would do is we would use a few properties that have used our programs in the past to illustrate how the use of some of these eligible expenses have translated into improvements to the buildings, the streetscape, and their marketability. So you may recognize this one. This is the former Westinghouse building at 286 Sanford Avenue North. And over the last 7 years or so, the property owners have been approved have had a number of their program applications approved. That has assisted in bringing it to its pretty close to its former glory, I would say. Now, as this property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, its owners applied for and were approved for 2 grants under our Hamilton Heritage Property Grant Program. Each program application was approved in the amount of $150,000, which is the maximum grant available under that program. And it was used for the the removal and replacement with them of all of the replica heritage windows on that building. Now, this program is available for eligible designated properties, which are in all of our commercial district CEPAs and in the lower city between Highway 403 and the Red Hill Parkway. So top right there, corner of the building, Barton Kenilworth Revitalization Grant Program. This is a program that on a matching basis can provide a maximum grant up to a maximum of $50,000. So in this case, the applicants applied for this program, and they used it for asbestos removal in 2017 to the maximum amount. our Barton Kenilworth Tax Increment Grant Program. Now, Council approved their application under this program in 2019, and this program provides for 9 years of tax grants, which commence following the first full year of reassessment. And the grant's based on an increase in municipal taxes that result because of improvements to the property. Now, in the case of this particular tax grant program, to be eligible, property has to be located within the Barton Street Commercial Corridor or within the Barton Village Commercial District SEPA. And for all intents and purposes, that's both sides of Barton Street East between James Street and approximately out to Parkdale Avenue in the east. And it's also available, I should say, as well on Kenilworth Avenue North between Main Street East and Barton Street East. And I'll also note at this point too that there is a similar program, our Revitalizing Hamilton Tax Increment Grant Program, which is a 4-year grant program. And it's also offered in a number of other SEPAs in the city outside of those centered on Barton Street. Both of these programs are geographic incentives intended to promote direct developments in key commercial districts. So just back to this program for 286 Sanford. So in the first 5 years after the property's been reassessed, the way that the program works is that the owner is eligible to receive grants up to 100% of the increase in municipal taxes that result because of the redevelopment of the property. And then the grant would then decrease by 20% over the next 4 years. So 5 years plus 4 years. So that's how it becomes a 9-year grant program. And when this application was approved in 2019, the estimated tax grant for this property over the 9 years, it was estimated at $934,000. You can see a reference there. There's a nice photo of indoor office space that was helped. Its creation was assisted through a successful application to our startup. Well, it was called the Office Tenancy Assistance Program. It's now called the Startup and Office Tenant Attraction Loan Program. And it's used to support the creation of new office space and improve the marketability and attractiveness of existing office space now, so that it can be used for startup businesses and startup business incubators as well. In the case of 286 Sanford, they were approved for loans in the amount of $250,000 on both the second and third floors of this building. And what that photo shows, maybe some of you have been in there, that's the McCallum Sather Architect's office, which is located on the second floor of that building. And I should say that each of those loans, they are interest-free, and they are to be paid back depending on the terms of the loan agreement, maximum of 5 years to pay it back. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide. So this is, as it stated there, 488 and 500 Upper Wellington Street. It was, some of you may know it, it was the former police station, as just when you come up the mountain on Upper Wellington. And the property owners took advantage of both of those programs that are indicated there. It's actually under construction right now. And it's going to be, I think, Phil, correct me if I'm wrong, it's approximately 280 units over 8 stories, I believe, that will be constructed on that site. So they did take advantage of both our ERASE redevelopment grant program and the ERASE study grant as well. And they were approved for a tax grant of $5.3 million under the ERASE redevelopment grant. And prior to that, they'd been approved for $35,000 for 2 study grants that assisted with them looking into the then current state of the property as well. Okay, so our programs, thank you. Some of our other programs also apply to some smaller properties within the city, so it's not just the big developments. And what we see here, starting on the left-hand side, that's Hottie Smashburgers at 657 Barton Street. So they were able to take advantage of our Commercial District Revitalization Grant Program, which assisted with the new signage, painting the facade. I believe they used it for CCTV cameras and as well. That program is offered on a matching basis, up to $25,000 in various BIAs where it's within a SEPA. And then if it's in a SEPA that is not in a BIA, the maximum matching grant is $12,500. So that's covering on the Barton Street one. If we look at the mural at 372 King Street East, so that they took advantage of the same program. It was under a different name. And because it's found within the boundaries of the International Village BIA, they were able to take advantage of the maximum grant available to them. And then finally, on the right, bottom right, that is the Ottawa Street Market at 204 Ottawa Street North. And they took advantage of that same program to help construct the permanent patio that you see there, painting of the exterior of the building, and that nice roll-up door as well. So that was formerly the Ottawa Street BIA office, and I think it was a bank branch before that. So it was quite a transformation that they were able to use the program for. And back to Hotties for a second. They also took advantage of our commercial vacancy assistance program. They received a maximum grant of $10,000, which they used for permanent interior improvements to the property, which included new floors, ceilings, and I believe they used it for new plumbing in there as well. Now, to date, for that program, it was created coming out of COVID as an incentive to take empty commercial space and hopefully quickly transform it into used space. That program is a little different from our other ones in that only tenants can apply. In most of our other programs, either the property owner or the tenant can apply. To date, we've only had 6 applications to the program, but we are seeing greater interest in it. And hopefully, as the economy begins to improve, inflation goes down, interest rates go down, hopefully this interest is going to turn into applications. Okay, next slide. Okay, so some of our successes. So back to the tax increment grant programs for a second. So these tax increment grants, they're a tool that we use to hopefully serve as an economic catalyst that's going to incentivize development behavior or overcome financial barriers to development in support of city goals and objectives. Now, they do represent a delay in the realization of new tax revenue from development, but it is revenue that may not otherwise have materialized if not for the grant being provided in the first place. And of course, after it's now a 4-year tax program, if it's downtown. Once the tax grants have expired, of course, the city continues to realize the increased tax revenue from that property forever going forward. So these tax grant programs, they do serve some key city objectives, which include increasing assessment of property tax generation from urban or infill intensification sites. They maintain and help to grow resident populations to support existing and new commercial businesses. And they also support population and employment concentrations that will hopefully utilize existing transit and support new demand and investment in higher order transit. So as you can see there, those are some of the key, I guess, metrics, if you will, that have been realized from the Brownfield program, starting at the top. So for every dollar in erased tax grants, approximately $18 in private sector investment has been leveraged. It's helped create over 3,300 new residential units and over 1.9 million square feet of industrial, commercial, institutional floor area as well. And since 2001, an estimated $1 billion in new property assessment has generated or helped to generate over $11 million in new municipal tax revenue. And just to give an example of a successful development that's used that program, that's the Kiwi condominium project at 212 King William Street. They had applied and received an erase redevelopment grant with an estimated value of $4.7 million. Next slide. Again, this is the Revitalization Hamilton Tax Increment Grant Program. And there's some of the key, I guess, metrics coming out of that one, where, for example, every dollar in tax increment grants provided approximately $26 in private sector investment. It's helped to create over 2,500 new residential units. Over 1,700 of them approximately are rental, and then 20,000 square meters of new commercial space as well. And perhaps most importantly, since 2016, it's helped to generate new municipal property taxes to the tune of $38 million, and it continues to grow. That project on the right is 43 to 51 King Street East, at the corner of Houston and King. And they were approved for a grant of approximately $4.5 million. So with that, I will now turn it over to Johnpaul to speak about the current CIP review.
All right, thanks, Carlo. So as noted, CIPs are typically reviewed every 5 years, and this year the work program includes the review of our environmentally minded CIP and the LEAD grant program. So for some background, under this LEAD CIP is the LEAD grant program, and there have been 2 main successes to date, and they include the Maple Leaf Foods building, which received a grant of $2.6 million, and the Stryker Canada building, which they build hospital beds. They received a grant of about $271,000, and both of these buildings achieved LEED Silver. So LEED being the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design certification. And this is probably, at least at the time of the construction of the CIP, was the world's most widely used green building rating system. And just another note, as part of this certification, they typically include other aspects, not just energy efficiency, but also waste diversion, indoor air quality, and a number of other things. And this program uptake hasn't been tremendous, but as shown, the grants have been pretty sizable, and interestingly, have been for manufacturing or industrial developments. And there could be many reasons for this. Some of which is because we do have other pretty lucrative programs that Carlo had just mentioned. But again, this maybe goes to show how this program can potentially be improved. So just get now into a bit of the mechanisms of the LEAD grant program. So basically, it's a tax increment grant, and works off the uplift in municipal taxes generated on the site. Carlo touched on a bit of that. And so basically the idea here is that there isn't an impact to the tax levy. Okay, so the next slide, thanks, changed it. So having said what I've said so far, I just find this cartoon kind of fitting. So in evaluating the CIP, as we're doing right now, I think it's a just fine program, but it definitely can be improved and could become, I think, more relevant to what's sort of going on today. Not just all the climate change information coming out, but also just some of the information that we just have with us now. But I'll just also note there are also many challenges to providing incentives and improving the programs. So why are we reviewing it right now? Well, as we had mentioned, the program was created in 2010, and there have been really no major changes to the program since then. But I think more importantly, we have to look at some changes in direction and council priorities since 2010. So as Judy had mentioned, we're in a climate change emergency. City Council declared that in 2019. And in 2021, we've been doing some substantial climate change work. So 2021, we did a lot of modeling work. And this is not our group, but this is the city, substantial modeling work to inform the 2022 Community Energy and Emissions Plan and the Climate Change Impact Adaptation Plan, which informs the overall climate action strategy. And then in 2023, the Climate Change Initiatives Office was established. So you can see a clear city and council priority for climate change action. So some of the biggest challenges, I can say pretty confidently that we need some form of incentive, whether that's financial or otherwise. And we know that these incentives are needed because not all developers are building to a standard above the Ontario Building Code. And we need incentives to simply increase the speed of the uptake. As I mentioned, we're in a climate emergency. So staff need to find and obtain funding, whether that's from taxes, which is going to be difficult, or third parties to allow for these grants. We can't, it would be nice if we could just rely on tax increment grants that don't have an impact to the tax levy, but as I'll get into that, those are not always reliable for all the types of improvements we need to all the types of our buildings throughout the city. Another challenge is just simply convincing the development industry that building green is worth pursuing, and I'll get a bit into that later as well. And finally, we need to find a way to specifically address funding for building retrofits. So retrofits don't generate any significant tax uplift. So again, going back to those tax increment grants, which can potentially generate a lot of funding for the applicant. But with retrofits, you typically don't generate a lot of tax uplift. And we know retrofits, they can reduce greenhouse gas emissions pretty significantly. And this is particularly important for the city of Hamilton because we have a lot of old building stock that's ripe for adaptive reuse, or just simply buildings that are just not up to the building code because of the time when they were built. And just to that first point there about new provincial legislation, there are also municipalities that were looking at other ways of promoting green building through non-monetary means, like a concierge service through the planning process, to help get these developers who were submitting quote unquote green buildings to almost fast track them in a way or have dedicated staff to their projects. But now with the new provincial legislation that has effectively compressed building permit timelines, or sorry, development application timelines, this has made this very difficult, if not impossible. And so it's getting very difficult to come up with these creative non-monetary means of promoting green buildings. Go to the next slide. So having initiated the review of this CIP this year, we've come to some preliminary thoughts and have identified some early areas of focus. So we know for sure we'd like to expand the programs in the CIP to capture other certification beyond LEED. That's without question. We're also still considering, though, whether the program, if the program's mandates should be greenhouse gas reduction specifically, or other things like, on-site renewable energy. I mean, it could be both, but does the core of the program have to be, for example, GHG reduction? Also, we're thinking that perhaps the focus should be on industrial or commercial areas of the city. There are a lot of programs which are not necessarily as part of our CIPs, but that focus on residential uses where households can get perhaps funding through some other programs. So we're thinking again that maybe this could be a focus. This CIP, this future CIP could focus on industrial and commercial areas. Perhaps one of the defined geographic areas could be the Bayfront area or the airport economic growth district around Hamilton's airport. You could see that the LEED CIP has found a bit of a niche, specifically on incentivizing green buildings. And it would also be useful if we could develop some form of program that helps with funding modeling grants that encourages developers to sort of dip their toe, so to speak, into this green movement, to help them get looking at the cost of building green and how beneficial it can be to them. But one thing really is, like, what type of developer will build will want to build green buildings. So for example, someone building a condo that doesn't retain the ownership, they may not be interested in that. So that's another reason why we are thinking that industrial and commercial buildings might be more appropriate for a program like this. Those owners tend to have ownership for a longer time, and so they can see out those long-term investment benefits. And also, this could be a potential tool to implement the green development standards that the planning division is working on, and I'm sure you'll see a lot of information on that shortly. And then finally, just to sort of bring it back to the economics, there's definitely a spin-off to going green, and this can often reshape neighborhoods. And this is, well, of course, depending on the context of where it's being implemented. I think it has the ability to attract more tenants. Maybe I could even say perhaps better tenants or higher paying tenants. Higher rents are not always a good thing, but I think at the very least we could say it would help reduce vacancies. And finally, I think this is true for all things that get delayed. The longer you wait, more often the more it costs. So in this situation, cost is not just financial, but it's also the social and the environmental cost. And finally, I'll just give you a quick update on where we are with this review. So we've initiated the stakeholder review. So we've met with municipalities to understand the best practices. And next week, we're initiating the internal and external meetings. We're trying to look for funding and looking at ways to partner up with the Green Municipal Fund and the Atmospheric Fund. And these are agencies that can provide funding to municipalities for programs like this. We have a workshop planned for May to get the public involved and to obtain feedback. And we'll have our Engage page go live in early March. So you could see a lot of this information out shortly. So that concludes my part. I can pass it off now to Sylvia for any questions.
Great. Thanks, Johnpaul. So at this point, we welcome questions from everybody in the audience. If you'd like to raise your hand, and I'll call upon you, and you can unmute yourself and ask your question to any of the presenters on the team. And we do have a question here from Margaret. Margaret, you can go ahead, unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you very much. By the way, the presentation is very informative, and I had no idea you were doing all of this. So kudos to all of you on the team. I have a question about the ERASE program. So when your applicants submit an application, what kind of environmental information are they required to submit for the application to be deemed complete for the grant?
Hi, Margaret. It's Phil. So I administer the ERASE programs. So for our tax increment grant program, they are required to submit their phase 1, phase 2 ESAs. They're also, and probably more importantly, required to submit a remedial action plan. And all three of those documents have to have been prepared by a qualified person as defined under Ontario regulation. The remedial action plan is by far one of the most important documents because it outlines exactly how the site is going to be remediated or how it's proposed to be remediated, and also includes a cost estimate. We rely on that cost estimate quite a bit as far as the information we provide to council, and informs kind of the maximum grant that we ask council to approve as far as eligible costs that we would provide a grant for.
Thank you. Just a follow-up question. In the remedial action plan that's submitted, is there a maintenance requirement in that as well, usually?
So we'll help pay for any upfront costs that are required to, if there's an ongoing obligation for monitoring and stuff like that, we'll help with the eligible costs for the upfront installation of that stuff. We don't cover ongoing costs, but as part of going through the ERASE program, we do enter into legal agreements with our applicants, and within the legal agreements are certain requirements that the city stipulates must be met, which includes that the site doesn't become recontaminated or that the site's been remediated to all their appropriate standards. And if anything were to fail or not meet that test, as long as we're paying grant payments, then we would have recourse to stop any payments and get money back.
Thank you so much.
So I don't see any other hands up. If you have a question, please raise your hand. In the meantime, I do have a question. We did talk a little bit about Sanford getting 900,000. Another program that Leeds program gave 2.3 million. Off the top of your heads, for anybody on this team, what is the largest incentive grant that has been given that you could think of? How high do they go?
I guess that probably comes to me because I think it's mine, but it's not a competition. It's not a competition. In fact, the lower the better. But I do believe, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe 488 500 Upper Wellington has been the most expensive grant approval to date at $5.3 million. And interestingly, the remediation costs. So Carlo's program is kind of just based on it's a revitalization. It's a standard calculation. A race is more tied to the cost to remediate the site. That's what we're reimbursing for. And as many on the call are probably aware, construction costs have been rising quite rapidly recently. And so we have actually seen quite a big uptick in remediation costs that go along with that. And so we are seeing grants increase from what they used to be, kind of reflective of that increase in construction costs.
Yeah, I think I'll interject here. I think you were the highest, but I think Carlo might have beat you now.
Oh,
Because I think 41 Wilson,
Yeah.
3 towers, wasn't that almost 6 million?
That's correct. It was 3 towers, and I just looked up the report here. So they were approved for 5.984 million, so almost $6 million over 4 years.
Oh, that is very significant. And do you think that these developers, builders wouldn't be interested in the business if it wasn't for these grants and incentives?
I'm going to turn that over to Judy, but I think it's important to make a point too here as I scroll down that the total tax increment grant on that was, when we added up all the estimates, was 9.5. So, going forward, actually, I'm looking for if you could answer that question, Judy, I'm going to look for the correct answer just to show what the benefit to the city is on that big number.
Yeah. And I'll say, because we're always thinking about that, are incentives needed? And I know council always wonders about that as well. And so that's why we do a review every 5 years. I've been really into this as well, just because the development charge bylaw is now under review and there's a new draft DC bylaw. And so we've been working, also commenting and working with developers to find out about the impact of, let's say, removing DC exemption. So in terms of what developers say is most impactful to them to get a project forward, is the DC exemptions are the most important. Second would be the tax grants. And so when we've asked developers really to understand how impactful it is on their pro formas, they say it makes all the difference between going ahead or not. And, as little as a 2% change on the pro forma can decide whether to proceed. And the one thing that we compete, money is very fluid. We compete against municipalities all around us. And so if the price per square foot can be achieved higher in other cities, there's other factors in Hamilton that makes it a little more difficult. Some of it, what Phil was talking about, is the soil is sometimes, because we're an older city, former industrial in many ways, is that there's a lot of unknown, which adds risk to the project, also can add timelines. It takes a little longer to sell out a project, and therefore, if they can't achieve the minimum pre-sales, then they can't even get financial construction financing. That also adds risk and extends timelines. So there's a lot of unique challenges in Hamilton, and that's why they have told us, and I know we have to take it with a grain of salt because are they always going to tell us that? But I think we have reviewed pro formas of different projects, and we have determined that you know, we do need to incentivize sometimes to see the huge success that we've had. And unfortunately, right now we're going through a little bit of a market downturn because of high interest rates. And so we do have to examine what's going to happen in the next couple of years.
Thank you. And we do have time for one last question from Lauren. Lauren, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for all the information today. I just wondered about commercial vacancy in new builds and how the programs that you guys offer, if there's any, I don't know, control or kind of requirement for those units to not sit vacant. Like, I just think of the new builds that I'm seeing and that some of those spaces being used just for storage. And maybe that's because there's not a commercial tenant in at the time that it was constructed, but the space was intended for commercial. So I just wondered how those programs, how they might address that.
I'll start with that. I think, and maybe Phil has something to add, but you know, when we require first ground floor commercial, I know in this environment, the retail market has really been affected by even before the pandemic with e-commerce. And so I know that it's challenging for them to find tenants for the commercial space. And then when the pandemic happened, I was really worried about what would our commercial quarters look like if they've all gone home and we don't have people on the street. Our office tenants, a lot of them are working remote and hybrid. And so it is a huge impact even more on the commercial district. So that's why the commercial vacancy program was created, and it was just made permanent. We did it sort of as a pilot and then made permanent just in the fall of 2023. And that's why we made it a condition that the tenant needed to be the one so that we could actually see a lease signed. I don't think we can enforce that you know, they took away where vacancy buildings received an extra break on taxes from the city. So that is gone. And but other than that, we sometimes work with the developers when they ask, what do you want to see here? So they do sometimes work with us. I was at a meeting this Tuesday, and there's a new condo development coming downtown, nice 2 towers. They want to know what are the types of things that we think would help. And so I'm glad when they try to include us and we can present our ideas. So Phil, do you have anything to add? Like I don't think we can make them get rid of it because a lot of it, they have a really tough time finding tenants.
Yeah, no, not much more to add other than just to say that a big part of our team's focus is on commercial districts and doing whatever we can to reinforce, maintain, and improve that commercial environment on these main streets and in downtowns. So we like to see that commercial space being provided. We even provide comments through planning circulations about the, you know, if there's changes that might reinforce the commercial function in the street, changes to developments. But the first venture into this really has been our commercial vacancy assistance program that we just created out of the pandemic. So, and that was trying to get at a niche area of trying to provide new incentives to address that vacancy. It's been slow uptake, like Carlo said, but we do have a lot of hope for it. We just think we need to do a bit more marketing of it to get it out there into the minds of tenants and to even get property owners aware of the program, because even if they can't apply, it can be part of a package of trying to entice a tenant to come into that building that has a vacant space, right? So that's really important. And we, when we first created that program, we focused mainly on permitting uses that would add vibrancy and activity to the street. So we didn't know offices weren't an eligible use, for example, focused on retail and restaurants and things like that. But through a more recent update that we just did in late last year, we did expand the range of uses that could be eligible for that program to start including personal services. microbreweries, kind of getting a little more outside the box of some of the things that that program could be used for. So that's one of the programs I think we'll continue to monitor just to make sure it's doing as much as it possibly can to assist with that. If the market isn't there right now for that space, how could we try it?
And can I add that we're just starting, we just kicked off last week to look at the retail sector a little bit more and maybe looking at plazas that are around the city that's ripe for redevelopment in terms of size and what the neighborhood is like. And so we're just about to start that. We had one meeting last week with the consultants. So stay tuned for that, because I think just knowing that the retail sector has really been impacted by a lot of things, that we're looking at that as an economic development opportunity. And if I could just add before we go, is that, you know, you see some of our members on the team, but I would like to acknowledge that we have a lot of behind the scenes people also working in our team. And I'll mention Lisa Browett, Carol Murillo, Christina Geisler, Kristen Hugebus, and the HBC and all her team, and our marketing and research team that gives us a lot of the research and marketing help. And obviously we work closely with the whole BIS team. So just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people behind working on this together.
And I think I see a lot of them listening in on this presentation, which is great. Well, thank you, Phil, Carlo, Johnpaul, and Judy for a very informative presentation. And thank you for the important work that you and your team does to help people take advantage of these incentives, which help strengthen and build our community. So this brings our Lunch and Learn to an end. Keep an eye out for future Lunch and Learns in the next PED Stuff newsletter. And a recording of this presentation will also be shared on March 1st in that newsletter. If anybody has any ideas that they'd like to showcase or that think people would be interested in learning about, feel free to reach out to your member on the Employee Engagement Committee, and we'll be happy to take it into consideration. So have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.